Today is part one of the United Methodist Foundation of Louisiana's two-part webinar on church communications strategies. Today, the topic is the good, the bad, and the ugly, what we've learned during the pandemic. Todd Rossnagel is going to lead us today as we look back at what the pandemic has taught us. And tomorrow for part two, what the future of church communications might look like. So if you're here joining us today, make sure you register for tomorrow as well, because it will be just as compelling. Everybody knows Todd, but real quick background on Todd. He is the Director of Communications for the Louisiana Annual Conference. It's a position he's held since 2016. He's active in the United Methodist Church and received his licensed local pastor designation in 2014. Todd is a former news broadcaster and an on-air personality. He has a real knack for finding and telling a compelling story. From video production to social media training, Todd has been sharing his gifts with congregations all across the conference since he stepped into his role in 2016. And we're excited he's going to share some of his knowledge today with us. Todd is also a diehard Chicago Cubs fan, and he can share in a separate time all the ups and downs and the trials and tribulations of being a Cubs fan. And as a lifelong Atlanta Braves fan, I've got a big smile on my face this morning, but I am right there with you, Todd. So before we start, I want to invite everybody to feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that during the webinar. Later in the week, we'll be emailing the webinar recording out to all registrants. And with that, I will turn it over to Todd.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, 5 years ago today, Cubs fans were waking up to the same feeling that Braves fans are waking up to. Meanwhile, the Astro fans are still waiting for their first World Series championship. Yes, I said first, but we don't need to get into all that. All right. So thank you all for joining me. As Chris mentioned, first of all, I want to thank the foundation for inviting me. This is a great treat to discuss what we're going to discuss today and what we're going to discuss tomorrow. So tomorrow's webinar is really where, because today is sort of like the appetizer. Tomorrow we're going to kind of get into more specifics. And of course, we'll record this, so there's always that. They're recording these and they'll share them. But I really encourage you to join us tomorrow at this same time, because we're going to kind of get into more specifics as to what the future might hold. We'll briefly talk about it today, but tomorrow you'll hear me talk about, tomorrow we'll talk about this a bit more. Tomorrow we'll talk about this. So please be sure to join us tomorrow. And I think Kelly's going to put the registration link for tomorrow in the chat. So you can check that out. And of course, leave us a question if you have the opportunity in the chat. And I'm going to start sharing my screen here so that we can kind of get started. Just as a reminder for what I'm going to be talking about today, I am not going to be talking about the art and the science of gathering people together for worship with cameras and the worship experience as it relates to technology and everything that we have going on. Today and tomorrow, we're going to be talking about communications and how we communicate with people, especially since the pandemic has started. And understanding fully well that when you talk about communications, yeah, we're going to talk about cameras in the sanctuary and things of that nature, but we're not going to really go deep into that specific category. So I've entitled this The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And there are some good things that we've learned, but there's also some really bad things and some really ugly things that I think we need to unlearn. So really quickly, the good, we know we need an online presence. We're going to talk about all these in a little bit more detail. We know we need an online presence. We kind of have learned Zoom. We'll talk about that. Giving, for the most part, and I know there's probably some folks out there who might disagree with this, but giving in some ways did not fall off a cliff. We'll talk about that. We know the value of an email address and social metrics. We connected with a whole host of different folks, and we know the pitfalls of social media. We'll talk about all those. First, being online is no longer, this is a good thing, being online is no longer something that we should want. We now know that it is an absolute necessity for us to be able to have an online presence and be able to communicate effectively online, whether that's with an email newsletter or social media postings or on our websites. We know that we have to have this thing we call church. We got to have an online presence, right? I mean, it's no longer like, oh, I wish we had a website. Now, we know we have to have not only an online presence, but a robust online presence. And so that is a very good thing. We might not like Zoom. It's not ideal, right? I mean, it's not, breaking bread with one another, but we've sort of kind of figured this thing out called Zoom, right? We know how to use it, and it's sort of finding a place inside how we do church. It gives us a place where we can, in some ways, intimately share. I've seen some Bible studies being done on Facebook Live, and those are very valuable as I've been able to kind of dip into several different pastors and several different churches, both in Louisiana and outside of Louisiana, and that's been great. But there's also value in a closed private Zoom room or Zoom group where people can really unpack things intimately, knowing that only 5 or 6 people are in the room. So, when we first started, I think after the pandemic, a lot of people were sharing things and having things done on Facebook. But Facebook you can't really interact as well as you can with Zoom. So I think that's a good thing that we've kind of figured out Zoom and we know how to do it. We might be coming to the end of our Zoom time as we're about ready to kind of slowly go back in person. But I think Zoom is going to be very much a value add, most especially for those 2 or 3 times a year when you would serve on a board or serve on a committee and you would have to get together. I think you'll still get together, but you'll still also have an opportunity for people to join online if they need to via Zoom. So I think that's a good thing. We can go live with the touch of a button or several, right? I mean, we can literally flip our phone out and hit the live button and go live. I cannot tell you how many people did not know how to do that before February of 2020. And we have figured it out. We have figured out that with the touch of a button or several, we can indeed go live. And I think that is a very, very good thing. I think it's going to be incredibly valuable for how we do online church in the future. The fact that we now know, we know things like audio is really important, right? Video is important, but not nearly as important as a good audio connection. And we know the mess with, online music and singing songs, and we know what that's like. So I think that's a good thing that we've been able to figure out how to go live. It's also a bad thing. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Head on over to our website and give, or grab your phone and text certain number to certain number. We've kind of figured this out, right? And a lot of churches did not have the ability to give online, and now they do. And major props to the foundation. I will sing their praises here. They stand ready to help you if you still do not have text to give set up inside your church or online giving. The foundation has been doing a phenomenal job of helping churches get that set up and ready to go. So I think that's a good thing that we have finally gotten to a point where we can text to give, and that's a good thing. The most valuable piece of information that you have as a communicator inside your church is an email address. It's not a Facebook profile. It's not a Twitter following. The most valuable piece of information you have is an email address. But it's also in the ugly category So stick with me because for some reason, we just don't read emails anymore. But we're going to talk about that. So social media metrics. I think this is a good thing, and people are starting to kind of like really dive into looking at their Facebook stats. People really liked this. People really didn't like this. And so being able to kind of look at how people interacted with different pieces of content before the pandemic, that was just kind of done on the fly and live, and you'd finish a sermon or finish something and people would say, you know, I really liked that or I really didn't like that. But now you have like these actual metrics to go by, and I think that is a really, really good thing. It is going to provide a tremendous amount of value. We'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow, but I think social media metrics is very much a good thing, and we're learning how humans consume material. It's scary. It's weird. We don't really have a big social media attention span anymore. That's quickly diminishing. But it's good to see what attracts people and what doesn't attract people. We're connecting with people from all over the world, all over the country. This is a screen grab from when a couple on the right connected with Tiffany Postel from Newman United Methodist Church. I don't know if you saw this story, but they stumbled on, I guess there's a Newman United Methodist Church in Oregon, and so they went to the Newman United Methodist Church Facebook page, and it just so happened that Tiffany's church, Newman, had a much more active Facebook page, and so it bounced up on their page, and they started tuning in when Tiffany was doing a sermon and waving the palms. It was near Easter, and so they became big fans, and so they have supported Newman United Methodist Church here in Louisiana, and they live in Oregon. And I know Tiffany would love to tell you more about how this couple has interfaced with the church and kind of adopted Oregon has adopted that church in Louisiana. It's just a great story. And I could tell more and more and more of those stories, and you probably have those stories. The ability to connect with people both inside your community and abroad has been fantastic, and I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon. And I might get some pushback on this last little point here, but I know I'm going to get some pushback on this. I think we've figured out social media bad people. I think we know what pushes buttons now. I think 2 years ago, we might have posted something, and all of a sudden, all these people started throwing out mean things to say. But I think we kind of get it now. We kind of know that people live in silos, and we know that people are going to say bad things, and we know how to hide comments, and nothing surprises us anymore. We know that the social media landscape is a dumpster fire of comments and negative thoughts. But we're still there. We know it's a place that we need to be. And I think we've learned how to manage it. Now, I'm not saying that that's a good thing, that people out there are still negative. I just think we've sort of kind of figured it out. We've kind of figured out what's going to push people's buttons, and so it doesn't surprise us anymore. So I think that's a good thing. All right, so let's get to the bad. The things that we, as I said, we know how to live stream a service. It doesn't necessarily make it a good thing. Sometimes it can be a bad thing. We're hyper focused on social. I'll talk a little bit about that. We need better Wi-Fi, right? We need better Wi-Fi. And we also know that this work is expensive and complicated. So is the online church thing working? Sorta, kinda, maybe. Can we hear people really well? I don't know. Do we have enough cameras in the space? Are the people at home really connected? Are we doing a really good job of that? I could probably open this up to the floor and people would tell amazing stories. And then I could probably hear from a lot of people who would say, I don't know that they're really connecting and really connected to our church. So I kind of throw this in the sort of kind of maybe category because we haven't really quite figured it out yet. So that's why it's in the bad category and in the good category. Now, when it comes to Wi-Fi, you thought you had good Wi-Fi at your church, and now you know that your Wi-Fi is adequate at best. Almost everyone that I've talked to has come across this issue. We're pushing up 4K, 4K 1080p video, and we need a rock solid internet presence on Sunday mornings. So, hint, set aside more money next year for better internet, because it's not going to get any. It's certainly not going to get cheaper. But we need it. We need better Wi-Fi. And as my grandfather used to always tell me, a cheap tool is an expensive tool. And so the bad thing is that all of a sudden we're faced with buying lights, buying cameras, buying audio boards. And we just probably bought a bunch of things prior to the pandemic, thinking that we were buying the right things. And now we're having to buy new streaming tools. So, and we're trying to throw money at social media because we're trying to communicate with people on a much more regular basis. So, unfortunately, this stuff is expensive. So that's a bad thing. But we can overcome that, right? We can overcome that, I think. So let's talk about the ugly. These are things that are really bad. Streaming services ended up being a trend. I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll talk about our social media attention spans. Email is an absolute mess, and engagement has gotten worse. All right, so we quickly dumped online church, didn't we? As soon as we came from that first mask mandate that was lifted, we just poured into the churches, and the numbers online just plummeted. And it's because people want to connect. It's a good thing, right? Because people want to connect. But I don't know what online church is going to look like in 2-3 years. I really don't. Because it takes a lot of sweat equity to do online church well, and a lot of people are going to be flocking back to the churches. So it's really ugly right now. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that we know how to do it. I just don't know how much it's going to be needed in the future, because we're quick to just dump and get back to in-person worship. We have found that on social media, we cannot pay attention. What is the line from Ted Lasso? The memory of a goldfish. He told his players, have the memory of a goldfish. That is what's happening on social media. We are just flying through things, and we're not really pausing. Putting a 20-minute sermon on Facebook, nobody has time for a 20-minute sermon on Facebook. They might have time on YouTube for a 20-minute sermon, or they might have their smart TV connected to Facebook to watch a 20-minute sermon, but they're not going to watch it on Facebook. And the numbers are clearly showing that. There might be views, like it's in front of people's timelines, but the engagement on the video, the numbers are just not showing that the people it's not a place. We'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow, but we just can't pay attention. We just can't pay attention. So that's hampering our communication issues. We've talked about this. Email is a mess. People just don't read email. They don't check email. But it's also the most valuable piece. As I said earlier, it's very valuable to have someone's email address. We'll talk a little bit more detail tomorrow about how to improve email. But email is a mess. You got to be creative with your emails, and there's so many spam filters out there now that it's very, very difficult to communicate with people with email. And then finally, it just isn't fun, is it? It's just hard work to try and communicate on all these different channels in this post-pandemic world. So tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit about how to improve email. It's not easy, but we'll talk a little bit about how to improve our ability to email people. We'll also talk about an idea that I have for how to attract new followers. And again, this is easy for the guy who doesn't have a church to talk about this, but I'll talk about my idea tomorrow. We'll talk about the rise of TikTok. If you're not on TikTok, you need to be on TikTok. You need to be on TikTok. You need to be on Instagram and TikTok. You need to be on Instagram Reels, and you need to be on TikTok. TikTok is not about dancing. You got to be on TikTok. Got to happen. And we'll also talk a little bit about the all-in-one model of like Slack and those types of communication tools and how they could help you internally. So that, I felt like I just went really quickly through a lot of that. But I wanted to leave time for questions. So does anyone have a question that they would like to ask? I will stop sharing my screen so that I can see you. Let's see. I'm looking at the chat. I don't see any questions. I hope that was helpful. Tomorrow, like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about how to improve email. Quick story on email. Of all the conferences that GNTV works with, and they help us with our annual conference and helped us with annual conference the last couple of years, they said that the Louisiana conference checks email less frequently than any other conference in the entire denomination. So there is my cross to bear. So you do not read emails. I don't read emails as much as I should. If it's long, I wait. But yeah, it's an issue. So here's a question. Why do you think a church must be on Insta or TikTok? Well, that's where the people are. That's where the eyeballs are. And engagement on those channels is through the roof. So it's really where the younger demo is. And if we need to be reaching the younger demos, that's where we need to be. Facebook is kind of a standard platform for a lot of older folks. And it's the younger folks are on Instagram and TikTok. And I see that as the metrics, the numbers only show that it's going to increase going forward. So we, after Hurricane Ida, just a quick, during Hurricane Laura, we didn't post much to Instagram or TikTok. And now we're posting to TikTok and to Instagram Reels with our video stories. And Sam Hubbard, who is phenomenal in the work that he does in church transformation, talks about Chris Winterman. And actually, Chris and I spoke last night, Sam. I'm going to be sharing more of his story tomorrow because I think Chris is doing it extremely well. We had a deep conversation yesterday, Chris and I'll be sharing a little bit more about what he's doing on TikTok as part of the TikTok conversation tomorrow. So Sam's absolutely right. His 15-second theology is fantastic. So those are any other questions? So Chris, thank you to the foundation. I think the text to give information has been fantastic. I think that's one of the bright spots of the pandemic. As far as communication is that we've kind of figured out the text to give model.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. We appreciate this as well, and appreciate the teasers that you sprinkled all throughout your PowerPoint. That was great presentation today. And look, for everybody on the call, Todd's referenced the text to give consult and the work we did during the pandemic. We also work to help churches counsel with live streaming, that they didn't have those services available. And that was a partnership between the foundation and Todd directly with the conference's blessing to work to help our churches get on screen as we all made that transition. And we'll talk about that tomorrow. I do think that's a great challenge, Todd, is how do we get a little bit more off screen and communicate more one-on-one as we connect going forward. Any other questions in the chat?
So I did get a question that was texted to me, someone who knows my cell phone number and didn't want to use the chat feature. A little bit more about the Facebook platform and what I was explaining more about that. So I think that Facebook is for a church, for a specific church, I'm not saying that you should not be doing your sermons or you're showcasing your sermons or your church services on Facebook Live. I'm not saying that. I think that it still needs to go there. It needs to go on YouTube. It needs to be on your website. It needs to go as many places as possible. But I also, if I were a local church, I would be producing a 30-second, 1-minute summary of your sermon, the best 1 minute of your 20 minutes. I know it's hard because you have so many wonderful points, but the 1 minute that you just really nailed it or really summed up, that needs to be a video in and of itself, because that's what people are engaging with, is content that is about a minute long. Imagine going down a interstate highway and you look up at the billboard. You only have, 7-8 seconds really to read that billboard. That is very much the way content is on Facebook right now. People just don't get on Facebook to set aside 20 minutes to digest content. It just doesn't happen on that platform. They might do it on YouTube, and they might do it if they go to your website. But on Facebook, just think about it the way you consume on Facebook. You're scrolling, right? I mean, you're flipping through stuff. And that's really why TikTok took off, is because everything's only, about a minute 30, 2 minutes max. And so that's the entire platform. And that's why TikTok has really risen and the numbers are there. So, and then the other thing I would do on Facebook if I had a local church was I would be doing preview videos of, this is what we're going to talk about Sunday. And then you've got your sermon, and then this is what we talked about on Sunday. This is what you missed, and, connect with us. So those little short vignettes is what I think would be very, very popular on social media. Jay says he only looks at Lamar billboards. So he's a fan of the company of Lamar. I can only see certain attorneys' billboards in Baton Rouge. I'm not going to mention the attorney, but he's everywhere. So,
well, and Todd, you might speak to this too. I know we've got some people that are joining on the chat now a little bit, but I think from a transition standpoint as communicators, I think we transition from an either or approach to an and I think we're in a world of, to your point, it's not, I'm just going to be on Facebook or I'm just going to use email. We are really hurting ourselves if we're not on as many places and as many platforms as we can be.
Yeah. Well, Jason Moore helped us with that. Sam and Gloria Fowler brought him in. His Both And seminar was fantastic. And did a great job of that. And I'm sure that's probably some material that if you reached out to them, that they would make available. So you're absolutely right. We have to do both. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do things. I just think we need to rethink how we're doing some of these things. So question, what recommendations do you have for developing a digital ministry team to focus on the development of these unique digital spaces? That comes from Drew. Thank you, Drew. That's a great question. So I think there's a lot of board models at the local church level, and you guys know that far better than I do. But I would, if I were in a local church, I would consider forming a group of people, whether that's a board or a committee of people that, it's not just the recommendation of, the pastor that we need this new camera and new lights. It would be a recommendation of a committee that could also kind of, brainstorm and help find the best equipment at the best prices and bring forth those recommendations to the church level. And I would try to reach out to those people because they're in that space and they know that work, and they could probably help volunteer on an ongoing basis. So I think it's incredibly important to have a committee of people related to technology and equipment. Yep, Sam is telling everyone who got room in the cohort. Sam, if you could maybe leave a link in the chat. I know people would love to know more about that. Yeah, it's fantastic what they're doing. All right. So again, tomorrow, no, I don't see any other questions. Tomorrow we're going to talk about, I'll just give you, so yeah, Sam Hubbard at la-umc.org, is his email address. One of the things that I want to talk about tomorrow is, this concept in email called ClickFunnels. And it's very much a corporate thing. It's very much a salesy thing, but I think there's a way that we in the church can take advantage of what a ClickFunnel is. So we'll talk about what that is, what it looks like, what it smells like, what it tastes like, and then we'll talk about how we can do it inside the church to gain new followers with a digital footprint, because I think it's going to be very important. I have some great ideas here, and so we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. And then I'm going to share more with Chris and his story on TikTok and how to improve email, because we just can't. But think about it this way. This is why I think it's really it's still an important. If someone were to give you the slides to this presentation, you would expect to find it in your inbox, wouldn't you? You wouldn't go to Facebook. You wouldn't go to TikTok. You wouldn't go to Instagram. But if it's important, it's going to be in your inbox. If you have the parental form for VBS, it's going to be in your inbox. It's not going to be on Facebook. It's not going to be on Insta. It's going to be in your inbox. So the ability to connect with people and have their email address is incredibly valuable. It remains the most valuable piece of social media information that you could have at the church level. So that is it, Chris. I think we're 3 minutes over. You're muted.
Wrong click. Thank you, Todd. I really appreciate it. The content you gave us today was great, and I appreciate all the teasers and you sprinkled throughout, and that the lead-ins for tomorrow. So speaking of tomorrow, we hope you'll join us for part 2, 2 o'clock tomorrow, as Todd looks at the future of church communication strategies. If you haven't registered, you can find the registration at www.umf.org/upcoming events. We have a slide on the page right now. And we will be, as I mentioned before, we'll be emailing the webinar recording to everyone who joined us today, and it will be on our website as well in the coming days. Next week, on November 10th, we will have a webinar on that you won't want to miss. It's entitled Taking Care of Business, a roadmap for those who will someday take care of you, presented by Phyllis McLaurin. Now, if you haven't met Phyllis, you're missing out. Phyllis is a lifelong Methodist who is a retired private banking executive, and she will discuss the importance of creating that roadmap for our loved ones of how to take care of our personal business when we are no longer able. This topic is certainly very timely, given what we've all experienced and been through the past couple years. All trends in our country and our culture indicate that we are likely to take care or take in a loved one at some point in our adult lives. And Phyllis has developed a book, think of it as a workbook, that is a great roadmap to helping folks think of all the things that they would need to have and put together. Think of social media passwords, usernames, and other domains, everything from pet medication lists to the things that we all think are front and center for us, like account information and our wishes and intents for charitable giving. So Phyllis is going to take a shot at that, and we'll do it in a format discussion with she and I for about 30 or 45 minutes, talking about how we take care of our personal business for those who will someday take care of us. As a plus, we are giving away Phyllis's book free to the first 30 people who register and attend. And the web address for registering for all of our webinars is, as I said, www.umf.org/upcoming events. Or if you were just on our website, you can scroll down and click the banner ad and it will lead you into our webinars. With that, I'm going to wrap us up. And we do appreciate you joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Take care. Have a wonderful afternoon.